So welcome, everyone. My name is Demetria Miles McDonald, and I'm the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity and the leader of this monthly journey that we go on called Through the Lens, a book club and expert series that I started in 2020. Really, as the pandemic was getting started, I was pregnant with my first son and needed something to do. And so I started reading a book, and it was just a really heavy topic. So I called on some friends, and here we are today, 2 years into the book club, and just a lot of learning that's taken place, a lot of learning and unlearning. And that's part of our purpose in doing this. You know, we are lifelong learners, really coming together to tackle tough topics, engage in some really meaningful conversations with one another, and then to take action to facilitate change at work and really in our communities. And I'm so excited for you all to be here as part of that journey with me. A couple of things before we get started on today's session. Everyone should be on mute, but feel free to raise your hand, and I'm happy to promote you to panelists so that you can speak. Feel free to utilize the chat. But regardless of how you choose to interact or engage today, this is a safe space. Respectful disagreements are welcome, and I will be the judge and arbitrator of that. Any feelings of discomfort that you may have as part of today's conversation, embrace those, and feel free to reach out to myself or to Vicky after today's conversation if you want to dive into those feelings even further. Remain curious and open-minded. There's going to be some things that you learn today, either about yourself or about those that you work with. I know as part of reading the book and just in my conversations with Vicky, I've learned a lot about myself. I've had tons of revelations, and so I anticipate that you all will have some as well. You know, this is just the beginning of this conversation on being an introvert, extrovert, and everything in between. So take responsibility for your own growth even after today's session. If there are more things that you want to learn, please connect with Vicky so that she can really guide you and possibly even coach you on where to go from here. And then lastly, each one teach one. There's so much that we can share with one another. And in that process, we'll probably get something in return. So please share your learnings from today's session with someone else. So I want to introduce today's expert, today's speaker, to the one who's going to lead us on this magnificent journey, Vicky Cook. And Vicky is the founder of Vicky Regina Coaching, where she focuses on working on empowering and educating introverted women to stop using their introversion as an excuse for not creating the life they deeply desire. She believes that when you stop fighting your introverted nature, you come home to yourself and quietly thrive unapologetically. And I love that. Vicky is certified through, is it IPEC?
IPEC. Mm-hmm.
IPEC coaching, which is ICF accredited, and is working towards her certification through the International Coaching Federation. She specializes in deep mindset and belief work to help her clients rewire their belief system as they unravel years of social conditioning that keeps them stuck and out of alignment with their highest selves. After graduating from IPEC in 2016, Vicky ran her coaching practice alongside working full-time in corporate America as a senior product manager in financial software. But after getting laid off in fall of 2021, she embraced that as a sign to go full-time in her coaching practice, knowing that this was her path of purpose and impact. She focuses her work on introverts because as a hardcore and proud introvert herself, she knows firsthand how challenging it can feel to confidently navigate a world that prizes extrovert attributes. A lot of conditioning paints introversion as something that needs to be hidden or overcome. And Vicky's mission is to educate introverts and extroverts on what it actually means to be an introvert, to make the world a more introvert inclusive place. Introverts don't need to change who they are. They simply need to embrace their gifts and be open to doing things in ways that utilize these strengths. And this is when introverts thrive unapologetically. So, without further wait, Vicky, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome.
Thank you for being here.
Let me share my screen and okay, here we go. Nope, that's not it. Hopefully this. Hang on one second. I think I didn't. Okay, I think let's see what we get here. Nope, it didn't give me the right thing. So 1 second. Let me I think when I shared earlier when we practiced, it messed something up. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides? I want to make
Yes,
sure.
we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Demetria, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for those who are here and for those who are going to be watching this after the fact. I'm so glad you're here. Like Demetria said, this is something I'm super passionate about. I'm super passionate about expanding the conversation around introversion, what it means, and how introverts are currently limited in our society without even realizing it. So this is all about welcoming a more inclusive perspective when it comes to introversion. So if you are here and you were part of Demetria's book club, it's because you care about bringing different voices, different perspectives to the table so that everybody gets a voice. And so what we're talking about today is just a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because introversion isn't something that we normally hear or talk about when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But at the end of the day, it's really important that we do talk about it because, as Demetria said, introverts shouldn't have to change who they are. Introverts shouldn't have to pretend to be something that they're not in order to be accepted, embraced, successful, and also to be able to accept and embrace themselves. So this is all about normalizing the introvert approach so that it is understood, accepted, and celebrated by everybody in an organization, from top management all the way down, so that there is more understanding and there's more freedom for introverts to show up as themselves and to really connect with their strengths and share their strengths. So what we're going to be talking about today as we talk about this introvert approach and making things more inclusive is I've broken it down into 3 parts. The first part is understanding and really clearing the air about what it means to be introverted. Then we're going to get into awareness so that we get more clarity on how this non-inclusivity, how it looks for introverts. And I think a lot of that is where even introverts themselves or people who may not realize that they're introverted may start to recognize, oh, wait a minute, this is happening to me, or I see this happening. And then the final part that we'll get into is the commitment piece and talking about inclusive leadership and what that actually looks like. So I'm going to skip the about me because Demetria did such a great job sharing all my background and a little bit about me, and same with my mission. So we're going to just skip right through that and get right to the good stuff. So in this first part about understanding and clearing the air, we're going to talk about what introversion is versus what it isn't. Now, I know you guys read Quiet as your book, so you have some understanding of this, but I just want to make sure we're coming from, talking about the same thing. We're on the same page. And then I'm going to share some common misconceptions about introverts to show how this misunderstanding, how it shows up and what people end up believing about introverts that aren't necessarily true. And then I'm going to dive into what I call extrovert bias conditioning, which is not something I hear a lot of other people talking about, but this is really the root of what causes introverts to not understand themselves and what causes the society in general, not just organizations, but society in general, to subconsciously and not, just not even being aware that they exclude introverts on a daily basis. So before we get into all of that, let's talk about how many introverts there are out there. Now, there are no absolutes. This is, it's not obviously a diagnosis. There's not a hard, fast number of it's precisely this many introverts in the world. But if we go back to the 1950s, there were some studies conducted at the time, and it was believed to be that there were about 25 to 30% of the population were introverted. Now, if we fast forward to the 1990s, the MBTI manual, which is published by MBTI, who does the Myers-Briggs questionnaire, they used 50 years worth of data to conduct the largest study to date on introversion and extroversion. So this is about the mid-90s, using their data. And they felt it was a pretty representative sample of our society. And they found that about 50.7% of the population likely identifies more with being introverted. They did another study in the early 2000s, so about 10 years later, and they basically looked at the data again, and they saw that it was actually at that point at about 57% of society was probably identifying more with the introverted side. This was 20 years ago. I would imagine if they did a study again now, or they looked at the data again now, they would see that number even higher. Because I know once the pandemic hit and everybody was stuck at home, I had a lot of people I worked with, friends, clients, just a lot of people tell me, I either they feel like they became more introverted during the pandemic, or they felt like I didn't realize how introverted I was. And it's not that people became introverts, they just really had the opportunity to be out of the hustle and bustle, to be out of that constant, being around tons of people all the time. They were able to slow down, spend some time at home, and they became aware of their more introverted qualities. Yes, exactly. During the pandemic, I think is a really great point. Oops, great point, Demetrius. It really highlighted that for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I bet if we looked at it again, we would see the percentage even higher, which says the majority of the population is actually introverted. But I would say the majority of the people that are introverted don't even recognize or realize that they are. So there's a huge opportunity here. And this is why it's so important when we talk about inclusivity for introverts in organizations and society. The majority of the population aligns with this way of being. So it's really, really important because right now, the majority of the population is being excluded or having to pretend to be something that they're not. So let's talk about what introversion is. So it is, I don't consider it like a personality trait. I consider it a preference for how you interact with the world. So it's not an absolute, it's a continuum, it's a scale. Nobody's 100% introverted, nobody's 100% extroverted. Everybody has elements of introversion and extroversion in them. It's why introverts actually do enjoy being social from time to time. It's why extroverts enjoy having some time alone and to themselves sometimes. So nobody is 100% introverted or extroverted. The degree to which you enjoy being alone versus being around people is obviously going to vary based on who you are and how much you are, where you fall on that introverted extroverted scale. But you're going to have times where you're going to move through the scale. So again, this is why it's super important to be talking about this, because as you make changes to your organizations, or we make changes in society to make it more inclusive for introverts, it's actually helping everybody, not just introverts. Now, the degree to which you are impacted by introversion or extroversion is due to how you source your energy. You probably know this from reading Quiet. Introverts source their energy usually by being alone. They source it internally, whereas extroverts tend to source it more externally and being around other people. Also, external stimuli. How impacted are you by external stimuli? So external stimuli is anything that's going to be engaging or activating your five senses. Extroverts are less sensitive to external stimuli, so it doesn't bother them as much. They can handle more of it, whereas introverts tend to be more sensitive to it. So lots of talking, lots of restaurants that are really loud, offices that have a lot of activity can be very overwhelming for introverts or overstimulating. And it's not just audio, it can be lots of people walking around, so visual stimulation as well. Internal versus external focus orientation. So this kind of ties into that sourcing your energy, but this is going more into introverts tend to be internal processors. So introverts need to think things through. They need to, get lost in their thoughts. They tend to enjoy daydreaming. They can go deep in their thoughts, whereas extroverts tend to want to talk things out, want to externally process things. Brainstorming with bouncing ideas off of a bunch of people really works well for extroverts, but introverts need a little bit more space to just think about what's going on. So as a manager, if you are a team leader, this is really important to be aware of, because you may have some people that come to you immediately and want to talk through their problems, and then other people you rarely hear from. And it's not, it's really just be due to how they process information and think things through. And then there are studies that show that the chemical makeup of the brain in terms of like different, I won't go into the details here, but it's really fascinating, but different chemicals like dopamine, there's a chemical called acetylcholine that is about that chemical is really about how we feel calm and alert. It's the chemical that allows us to really focus on tasks. So introverts and extroverts respond differently to both, and there's a natural preference for one versus the other for introverts versus extroverts. Same with our nervous system, the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. Introverts and extroverts have a natural leaning toward which one feels more comfortable for them, even though as humans we use both. But introverts will seek out conditions that will align more with the system that aligns better with them, and same with extroverts. So it's wiring. It's how we're wired. So now let's talk about what introversion is not. It's not a diagnosis. It's not something clinical. It's not anything wrong with you. It's not a weakness or a disadvantage, even though society, through this conditioning, may have us believe that. It's not. It's not abnormal, as we saw from the percentages earlier that I was showing you. Likely more than half of our society is introverted. So it's definitely not something that's abnormal. And it's not something that needs to be fixed or overcome. Talking about how we're wired, the biology, how our brain works, we can't change that. That's just how we are wired. So it's not something that we can fix. It's not something we can overcome. It's not something that we should have to. I like to a reference point to that I like to use to help people understand that is if you go back like 100, 150 years, children in school that were left-handed, teachers would try to force them to be right-handed, right? Because they felt like this was the right way to be. This was the appropriate way to be. So they would try to force them not to use their left hand, which I think we can all agree is pretty cruel. But as a society, if we're trying to force introverts to be extroverted or saying that's the only way to be, it's essentially the same kind of thing that we're doing. So now let's talk about some common misconceptions about introverts. And this is going to lead us into talking about the conditioning, that extrovert conditioning that we see, which is what leads us to believe these common misconceptions. So a lot of people believe that introverts don't like to be visible. They don't like to be the center of attention. They don't like to attract attention. They don't like to be, they don't like to be visible. A lot of people think introversion and shyness is the same thing. It's not. Two totally different things. Some people think introverts don't like people. Might be true, but I bet there's also a lot of extroverts out there that maybe don't like people. So it has nothing to do with being an introvert. A lot of people think introverts are ineffective communicators or ineffective leaders because they might be a little quieter. They're not like the loudest person at the table. Awkward, unfriendly, antisocial, snobby, nerds or geeks. No offense to anybody that nothing wrong with nerds and geeks, but there is this cliche that introverts tend to be more on that side of more identify more with as nerds or geeks. And then withdrawn, depressed, and sad. So half the people that you interact with, at least half the people that you interact with on a daily basis are introverts. You just may not know it. And they don't exhibit any of these misconceptions. They may not know it. These misconceptions they come to us through that misguided extrovert lens. If you're not talking, all the time, then you must be shy or, you don't like people. If you are not wanting to go out and socialize all the time or go to happy hour, well, then you must be unfriendly and you must be rude. If you want to spend your lunch hour alone, well, then you must be, just not wanting to be a team player. So there's all these misconceptions that we have that aren't necessarily true. So one thing I like to do is to show just a kind of a nice array of famous people who are introverts. Now, some of these people you may already know that they're introverts. Some of them you may not have known, but at the same time, it may not be a surprise. And then there may be some on here that totally surprise you that they're introverts. So we've got Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, Bill Gates, Meryl Streep, Steven Spielberg, Audrey Hepburn, Emma Watson, Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and then my favorite one to show, because this one usually surprises people, is Christina Aguilera. All of these people are influential and impactful and talented in whatever their chosen art, their art, whatever their thing was. And they're very visible, and I don't think you could call many of these people ineffective leaders or bad communicators. They all have their gifts to shine, and they're all introverted. So their introversion does not prevent them from excelling in the areas where they excel and making the impact that they make. So let's now talk about this extrovert bias conditioning. So again, this isn't something that I hear a lot of people talking about, but as I've navigated life as an introvert, and was in corporate for 23 years, this is what I see as the root of the problem or the issue around why introverts don't recognize who they are, why there's those misconceptions. So Conditioning is when your nature becomes a victim of your nurturing. It is when one way of doing things, one acceptable way of being is presented to you that is in opposition to who you truly are or the way that you naturally do things. So extrovert bias conditioning is happening when this extrovert ideal is painted or accepted as the preferred or the ideal way of being. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of that. She did a great job in Quiet to explain where this all started back at the turn of the 19th century and how it got, nurtured over the years and became such, ingrained into our society and the way that we think. But the problem with this is that conditioning leads us to believe things are true that aren't true. So it makes us think that it doesn't allow us to challenge thoughts. It doesn't allow us to challenge beliefs. It doesn't allow us to challenge those things that might be not be true because they don't feel like they're not true. They don't feel like they're things that we can challenge. They just feel like, well, that's just the truth. The earth is round. At some point back in time, people thought the earth was flat, and that's what was their truth. So this conditioning doesn't allow us to see different opportunities or perspectives, not only for ourselves, but for society in general. And that conditioning causes us to limit ourselves. It feeds our doubts. It impacts what actions we take or what we think is possible. So it teaches us that when it comes to the introvert extrovert side of things, it teaches us that introverts are at a disadvantage because it shows us that there's only one way to be. So I love this quote because I think it's just so impactful. But when a culture devalues introversion, we lose access to a vital life source. And it's so true because introverts bring so much to the table. So let's take a look at how this conditioning shows up in the world. So we see this in pop culture. We see it in TVs, books, movies. This is where that conditioning really starts where we're exposed to it at a young age. We see movies, the most popular main character who's got the looks and the money and the job, and they've got the guy or the girl, and they've got everything going for them, is usually presented as somebody who's outgoing, a people person, whereas the person who's maybe struggling a little bit, kind of, again, the nerdy person, the awkward person, the one down on their luck, is presented more as that introverted person. Even if they don't come out and say, this person's an introvert, that person's an extrovert, the subliminal messaging is what's teaching us that that's the way we should be. That's the way we should not be. We see it in social media. Everybody's trying, if you scroll Instagram, everybody's trying to be louder than the other person. Everybody's trying to dance. Everybody's trying to make the most noise. Everybody's to look at me. And the algorithms reward that. They want more and more of that. We see it in schools and universities where teamwork is really prioritized. You're graded on your participation. If you're an introvert, you probably, like me, I got great grades when I was a kid, but I would definitely get comments on my report cards like needs to speak up more, needs to participate more, even though I was doing really, really well in school. And then we see the same thing in corporate environments. Lots of teamwork, lots of participation. Lots of teamwork means usually, lunchtime, lunches together, happy hours together, lots of meetings. The loudest person is the one who gets promoted or moved up the ladder or picked for the plum assignments. So we see that a lot. So it just gets reinforced that there's this one way that you have to be to move ahead. So the impact of all of this conditioning is that it fuels all those misconceptions that I was sharing with you earlier. And it means that, it paints introversion in a negative light. So introverted qualities, they're not recognized, they're not rewarded. And it also impacts how introverts see themselves. Even the ones who don't realize that they're introverts, they spend a lot of time trying to hide it or fake it. So they think that there's something about them that needs to fix. I can't tell you how many clients come to me thinking, I'm at a disadvantage. Help me overcome this. Help me fix this. And it's not something that has to be fixed or overcome. They only see that the only way to be recognized or valued or heard is, again, to try to be something that they're not. So this ends up limiting what introverts think that they can or can't do. There's a lot of things that introverts think they can't do because they're an introvert, which has nothing to do with introversion. Because again, it's just about where you source your energy for the most part. I can't tell you how many introverts come to me and say, I can't do networking because I'm an introvert. I can't do speaking. I can't do presentations. I can't lead teams because I'm an introvert. And none of that is true. But because you've been presented with this is the one way to do that may not feel natural to you, then you tend to avoid it, which means really all it is, it's not you can't do those things because you're an introvert. It's just you haven't had the experience to gain the confidence. You haven't had the ability to learn, or the opportunity rather, to learn how to do it in a way that works best for you, so that you can see that what I love to tell my introverted clients, you can do whatever you want. Anything you want, anything an introvert does, you can do, or I'm sorry, anything an extrovert does, you can do if you find the way that works for you. So, but this conditioning has us believe, well, I can't do that. And all of this leads to unconscious bias. So, and this is even with introverts themselves. From this lack of understanding, there is this unconscious bias, which we see in organizations when it comes to things like promotions and things like that, or hiring practices. So again, introversion does not limit you. Your beliefs about it do. And those beliefs the beliefs that you have that limit you are fueled by all of that conditioning. So if you believe that introversion is something that's going to limit you, then you're less likely to step out of your comfort zone. Again, introversion is not the reason. But if you feel like your nature, or your team members or your employees feel like their nature isn't accepted, well, how can they believe in themselves? If they're never selected, how can they gain confidence? So this is where, as leaders and as organizations, if you openly understand what it means to be introverted, and you as managers see somebody on your team that's not volunteering for things, that's not stepping up for things, that's maybe lacking confidence, you're going to know this is not because they're an introvert. This is simply because they haven't had the opportunity to get the experience they need to grow their confidence. So you can work with them on that. So this changes the conversation as a leader or as a manager. So now let's jump into part 2, and this is where we're going to get a little bit more clear on what this non-inclusivity looks like for introverts. So we're going to take a look at what's working and not, or what's not working in the current environment, the cost of this lack of inclusivity, and then how this is also impacting extroverts. Because again, everybody's got some introversion and extroversion in them. So as this inclusivity is, or this exclusivity is preventing introverts from feeling included, it's also impacting extroverts. So we're going to talk about that as well. So let's take a look at what is not working in the current environment. Now, this is based on my 23 years in a corporate environment. It's based on my clients that work in a corporate environment and me coaching them through the things that they're finding challenging. And then I get out and I network and meet a lot of people. And, I talk to a lot of extroverts as well, or I'm sorry, introverts as well when I'm networking. And these are some of the things that routinely come up as things that are challenging for introverts in the current environment. Personality-based promotion. So this is where that unconscious bias comes in, where there's, the loudest or the most outgoing get picked for things because people aren't even aware that they're choosing people based on those extrovert qualities. Open floor for sharing and feedback. So this happens a lot in meetings where it's like, okay, everybody just kind of throw out your ideas. That's a great environment for extroverts because they're external processors. Not such a great activity for introverts because they need that space to go in and think. So in those situations, depending on how, if people are talking over each other, the introverts just kind of shut down because they can't get into their thoughts to come up with ideas, and they can't get their voice heard to be able to share it. So this is one that's very challenging for introverts. Open floor office plans. Now, this is very common for offices now, but unfortunately, this is not an environment that's inclusive for introverts. It works great for extroverts most of the time. Even for extroverts, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, but it's not inclusive for introverts. It's overstimulating, it's distracting, it's not conducive to productivity. And if you've got at least half of your workforce who are introverts, then you've got an environment here that for half of your workforce isn't going to allow them to be as productive as they can, or as they might want to be. Heavy reliance on meetings and calls. I dealt with this a lot when I was in corporate, and it can be very draining. The constant interruption, the constant talking, the constant over talking. It's very draining for introverts. They don't get that space to get that opportunity to go in, recharge a little bit, go deep into whatever they're working on, and get in that flow. And same thing, similar train of thought, the constant pinging, quick questions, and, a text, an IM, I just got a little quick thing that I got to ask you. It pulls you out of what you're working on. And for introverts, that's really, we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, but this is really not aligning for introverts to constantly be pulled out of what they're doing. And finally, icebreaker questions. So this is obviously a common one when it comes to meetings, and it makes sense. And I'm going to give you some suggestions on how you can use this if you want to continue to use this in your organizations when we get to the integration tips. But icebreaker questions are, as I talk to introverts, every introvert has this experience. And even me, who's confident in talking in front of other people, if I'm in a meeting where I don't know people and somebody kicks it off like, okay, we're going to go around the room and everybody's going to share one fun fact about themselves, I instantly panic. My mind shuts down. I can't think of what I'm going to say. And I panic all the way up until it's my turn, meaning I don't hear what anybody else says until after it's past me. So if you've got 50% of the people in the room who are introverts who are experiencing something similar, the whole point of the exercise of getting to know people is lost because you're just in panic mode for what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And oh my gosh, I got to share something. And what if I don't want to share that? So I'm going to give you some suggestions on this when we get to the integration piece, but icebreaker questions are very common, and it's something that just doesn't work great for introverts. So the challenges right now for introverted employees in non-inclusive environments is that they don't understand themselves. A lot of introverts, I hear this when I was just telling Dimitri at the beginning of, before we kicked off the meeting, I was at a networking thing last week and talked to people. And as I shared what I do, I had several people, say things like, well, I used to be an introvert, but I'm not anymore. Or they saw them, they didn't understand what it meant. And so when you don't understand what it means, you can't really step into who you truly are and honor that. It also means that introverts are doing more mental work to fit in. So in addition to doing the tasks of their job, what they're paid to do, they're also having to exert a lot of physical energy or mental energy, not physical, but mental energy to try to figure out, how can I fit in? How can I do what I need to do? How can I be more of myself when maybe that's not necessarily what feels natural for them? Speaking up for themselves. Again, if you don't understand who you are, or even if you are starting to understand who you are, but you know that everybody else doesn't, it makes it extremely difficult to speak up and say, hey, you know what, can I get back to you tomorrow on these, some ideas? I really need some time just to process it and think through it. Or to say, hey, can I, I need no meetings tomorrow so I can really get into what I'm working on, so I can really be productive and provide, what you need. That can be really hard when it's not understood. And then finally, using introversion as an excuse to hide or stay in their comfort zone. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but when you don't understand what introversion is and what it isn't, it's very, very easy. And I think all of us introverts have done it. It's very easy to say, I can't do this because I'm an introvert. I can't go do that because I'm an introvert. And I think one thing that's really important to point out here for any introverts that are watching this or on the call, as I go through this and I'm really talking about understand who you are, honor who you are as an introvert. What I'm not saying is that this is giving yourself permission to never step out of your comfort zone. This is not giving yourself permission to never make a phone call again or to never volunteer to present. The goal here is for you to feel empowered to say, hey, there's a way that I can do this that's going to feel good. It's okay. It's safe to get out of my comfort zone to explore this. And as a manager or a team leader, same thing. The goal isn't to give permission to your introverts to say, oh, we're just going to honor how they are and let them stay in hiding. It's to help them find the way that is ideal for them so that you can work with them to find their path, that it doesn't look like how the extroverts do it. So the goal here is to not stay hidden, but to align and to speak up for yourself. Now, the challenge for organizations right now is understanding that there are different paths to success. What the path that one person takes may not look like the path that somebody else is going to take. And that's okay. It can't and shouldn't be cookie cutter how you get ahead or how you move forward. Not dismissing or diminishing those introverted qualities. Again, when you understand it, you can see the benefits and the strengths that introverts bring to the table so that you can celebrate them and amplify them. But right now, again, by not understanding it, the challenge is you end up dismissing or diminishing those. And then finally, providing the opportunity or the environment for your employees to build their confidence. And this goes across the board, whether it's introverts or extroverts, as team leads and managers and organizations should do that anyway. But when you understand that there is a different path to success, then you as an organization can create the environment for all of your employees to build their confidence in ways that that are aligned for them so that they can actually do that. Because at the end of the day, this lack of inclusivity for your introverts is creating a huge hurdle for introverts to fit into a limited culture. There's nothing wrong with them. They shouldn't have to fake it. They shouldn't have to pretend to be something that they're not. That's not right. It's not fair. So the cost of all of this is innovation and new ideas. If you don't have an environment where introverts can actually go in and process their thoughts, or that they can share in a way that where they actually can share, you're going to lose new ideas. The organization's not going to be as innovative. The well-being of employees, there's going to be more stress. There's going to be more sickness when people are constantly trying to be something that they're not. It takes a lot of energy to pretend to be something that you're not day in and day out. Ask me how I know this. I know this very well. It's exhausting. Less productivity. And then less authenticity and connection with employees and team members. How can they be authentic? How can they truly connect with their team members when they can't even feel like they can be themselves? And then finally, employee satisfaction. The introverts who are putting this, I call it the fake extrovert mask. When they're putting this fake extrovert mask on every day, they may not even realize it. They're so used to doing this from a lifetime of having to do it. They don't even realize that they're not as satisfied as they could be in the organization and with their job. So by understanding introverts, you as the organization, as the manager, as the team lead, you can value the changes that are needed. So this is like, it's like reverse engineering for the organization. Instead of the introverts having to come to the table and figure this out and pretend to be something that they're not, the organization gets to figure out how can we make this more inclusive? And then the introverts just get to be themselves. So this evens that playing field. The organization also becomes a thought leader and a trailblazer. No other companies are doing this. No other companies are talking about, or organizations are talking about how to be inclusive for introverts. Let's understand introverts. But if you as an organization can create an environment where everybody does understand it, and those misconceptions that we talked about earlier no longer apply because people get it, you are going to be a trailblazer. It's going to blow the minds of your introverted employees. It's going to make it a place that they really want to be because they feel seen, heard, understood, and they're learning even more about themselves. So they're connecting more with themselves. So let's talk really quickly before we get into the inclusive leadership. Let's talk about how this conditioning also impacts extroverts, because I think this is an important thing to talk about. So a couple of months ago, I was doing some research for some new content ideas, and I was Googling some things that I thought my ideal people might be Googling. And so I thought, you know what, let me Google how to overcome introversion. I'd never Googled it before, but I had a feeling that's something that my people might be looking for. So I Googled that, and no surprise, but everything that came back, every article, every YouTube video, whatever it was that came back was basically trying to teach introverts how to become extroverts. So it was trying to teach us to do all these things that were completely against our nature. So made me a little irritated, maybe a little annoyed. And I was like, nobody ever tells extroverts to be less extroverted. I don't think there's any extroverts out there thinking, I need to overcome being an extrovert. So I was like, well, let me Google that. Let me see what comes up if I Google how to overcome extroversion. So I Googled that. And what came back, I think there's nobody writing any content or filming any content on that. So Google did the best they could to bring back some results. And all of the articles, videos, whatever that came back was all about how to be more extroverted. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So the entire push from our society is just to be more and more and more extroverted. And as I go out and I network and I talk to extroverts, and they're interested in hearing about all this too, and we're talking about it, the one thing that really surprised me as I've been out talking to extroverts in addition to introverts is that extroverts are exhausted too. They are feeling the pressure to be more extroverted. So they're all just trying to out extrovert each other, and it's preventing them from having this space to just go in and be connected to those moments where they need to tap into their introverted needs. So basically everybody's exhausted. So again, by understanding that we need to have a collective shift in what we think about introverts and extroverts, it's going to benefit not only the introverts, but the extroverts as well. So everybody in the organization. So now let's get into this last part, which is about inclusive leadership. So we're going to talk about the new leadership that's needed. I'm going to provide you with some integration tips, short-term and long-term, for your organization so that you can walk away from this with some ideas on what to do. And then we're going to talk about, if you start to integrate some of these things, how that's going to provide benefits for your organization. So the way that I see it is that right now, the way society is it's very heavily in the blue area. It's very heavily designed to align with the extrovert approach. But if we look at the stats, most likely more than half of our population aligns with the green side, the more introverted side of approach. Now, my suggestion on all of this is not to throw away everything on the extroverted side and make everything 100% introvert, aligning with how introverts are, because then that would exclude the extroverts, and we don't want to do that. So the opportunity here is in the overlap, in just making it an inclusive approach for everybody. So this is where the opportunity is for organizations to look at everything and see, where is it currently falling? Most likely in the blue, and how can we pull it back so that we're being inclusive for everybody? So before we get into that, though, I do want to quickly touch on what introverts bring to the table, the strengths and gifts that introverts have. Now, introverts are individuals. We are not all carbon copies of each other. So these are generalizations. Not every introvert may have all of these characteristics or strengths. And this is not to suggest that extroverts don't have these characteristics and strengths, because again, everybody has a little bit of introversion and extroversion in them. But in general, introverts tend to be your deep thinkers. We have rich inner worlds. We like to go in and think things through. If we can get into the flow of working on a project where we can just really go deep with it, that's where we can do our best work. So this is why things like multitasking and constant interruptions are not the best, and just not the best environment for introverts. You want them to be able to have that space to go in and do that, because that's where they're going to get, produce the best work and come up with the most creative, innovative ideas. Introverts tend to be very detail oriented. So because we're not the ones who are out there trying to talk to everybody or, process things externally, we tend to be more observant. So we're looking at things. And so we end up noticing things and seeing things that other people may miss. And that's a real gift. As an organization or a team, you want people to be able to do that. Creative, again, doesn't mean extroverts aren't creative, but we do see, like in the art world and in artistic endeavors, people tend to be there's even a higher percentage of introverts in those communities. So again, it goes back to that deep thinking and the rich inner world. Introverts tend to be very creative. So again, you want to provide the environment for your creative folks, your introverts, to be able to tap into that and bring those ideas to the table. And problem-solving skills. A lot of introverts exhibit very strong problem-solving skills. I think it's because of the deep thinking. It's because of the detail-oriented. We can see those dots that maybe other people miss, and then with the creativity, we can connect those dots in a way that maybe others can't, which really lends to some really strong problem-solving skills. Excellent listeners. This is probably the thing that most introverts hear the most, is that they're a really great listener. And I think it's because most of us don't love to dominate conversations. We're not necessarily in love with talking about ourselves. We have a natural curiosity about other people. And so we tend to like to ask people questions about them. We're comfortable with other people talking. So this is really great for, in an organization, because then it allows other people to be heard, which is why it also makes introverts very strong team members. Even though I've been talking a lot about, introverts love to be on their own and they need just some time on their own, it doesn't mean that they can't or shouldn't be in teams, because introverts bring that all of these skills to the table. And the thing about introverts is they want everybody else to be heard on a team. They don't want to take all the credit for things. They want to make sure they're contributing and doing all the work. So they make very strong team members, which also is the same kind of qualities and characteristics that make them very inspiring leaders. When we looked at those famous introverts, there were some really inspiring leaders on there. So just because they may not be the loudest person in the room doesn't mean that they're not going to be an exceptional leader. And then finally, introverts tend to have a wealth of knowledge. So again, the deep thinking, the going in and thinking a lot, working on things, getting really into something, it tends to, a lot of introverts love to learn. So your introverted folks on your team are going to be a wealth of knowledge. You want to be able to tap into that. That's an asset to have on your team. So it's time to normalize a new approach and understand how people work best so that everybody can bring their best to the table. So let's time to normalize things like focused work time. Let's normalize having no interruptions or encouraging people to time block their calendar so that they can do that. I used to do that. And thankfully, my boss, when I was in corporate, was totally supportive of that. I would take a look. If my calendar was starting to get too full on a certain day, I'd go in and block it off. And unless an emergency came up, then I could have that uninterrupted time to just work. Take a look at your meetings and calls. Like, it's time to normalize having less meetings and calls. There's a reason there's that meme that says, hey, that could have been that could have been an email. Introverts tend to process again because if we process things internally, writing things out is sometimes a better way for introverts to express themselves. So emails may be a better solution in some cases. Again, we're not looking to get rid of all meetings. We're not trying to go all the way to the green side. We're looking for being more in the yellow, but tons and tons of meetings is keeping us on that blue side of that diagram. It's time to normalize skipping social activities. If you have team members that maybe every now and then they don't want to go out to lunch. I bet there's times that they don't want to go out to lunch as a team, but they don't feel like they have a choice. If they've had a really busy morning, a lot of calls, a lot of interaction, they may need that time by themselves to recharge. It's like when your phone's on, the red zone when it's almost dying, you're like, just give me a charger and I can plug it in for, 30 minutes just to get a little juice. That's what that lunch hour is for an introvert that may be mentally and energetically exhausted. So let's normalize that it's not someone being unfriendly or being snobby or just not wanting to be a good team member. They may really need that. And if there's the understanding there, there's less judgment and there's less misconceptions on that. And there's more acceptance and compassion for it. Normalize building in a little bit more breaks to all day meetings. I remember this in corporate, we would have all day planning meetings and they would be like 2 or 3 days. And because the meetings would everybody would be talking and talking and talking, we'd end up with only having time for maybe a 5-minute meeting or 5-minute break in the morning, a 5-minute break in the evening or the afternoon. And if we were lucky, a 30-minute lunch break. There were times that after like 2 or 3 days of that, I would have to take a personal day because I was just, I couldn't even get out. I just couldn't function because I was so exhausted. If we'd had a little bit more breaks built into that, it would have allowed me to sustain my energy a little bit more. So let's normalize that. Not having back-to-back meetings and calls. Again, it can be very exhausting for your introverted folks to be in that sort of environment. Providing space for quieter team members to contribute. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the integration tips in a minute. But again, that everybody share your ideas, just yell them out is not going to be the best environment. So you've got to think through some ways for your quieter team members to be able to contribute their ideas as well. And then finally, working from home. I think this one's gotten a little bit more normalized with the pandemic, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But if you have an employee that's saying, hey, or a team member that's like, I really need to work from home tomorrow to work on something, if it's not an inconvenience or if it's not like they're going to be missing something in the office, let's normalize having people have that freedom to do that. So now let's talk about some short-term solutions, some integration tips. So how you can start to bring some of these conversations into your organizations. So the first one is education. This by far is if you take nothing else from this presentation and what you can do to start to change things, education is the number one thing. Again, most people, because of this extrovert conditioning, they don't know what they don't know. They don't realize that their perceptions of introversion, extroversion is completely off base. So education is the number one thing that you can do. Bring people in to talk about it, bring me in to talk about it, have workshops, but teach people from every single person in the organization from the top down needs to understand this. This is not a conversation that should be on introverts to have. Although I'm welcome to take that on. But your people in your organization shouldn't have to do that. So education is key because this is going to create a cultural shift. It's going to change the dialogue. It's going to change the understanding, and it's going to pave the way for everything else that you might want to bring into the organization. Meetings. So some ideas for how to better conduct meetings to make them a little bit more introvert friendly. Provide the meeting agenda, in the meeting invite before, but when it gets sent out. A lot of people do that, but that's going to allow your introverts time to think through things. If you want there to be some brainstorming, provide what you want people to brainstorm on at least 24 hours before the meeting, and even encourage people to come in with 3 to 5 ideas already thought through, written down. because that's going to allow your introverts to think through, have that internal processing time so that they can think through before they come to the meeting and they don't get shut out of that ability to tap into that. Another thing you can do in meetings, we used to do this, it was really helpful, is instead of, again, having everybody shout things out, have Post-it notepads, and everybody writes that before anybody shouts anything out, write one idea down per Post-it note. People go up and stick it on the wall. And when you do that, every single person in that room has the opportunity to get their idea on the board. And if your meetings are virtual, there's multiple online virtual whiteboards, sticky boards that you can do the same thing. It's really helpful. It's a very helpful exercise that ends up including everybody. Again, normalize limiting your meetings, normalize having people, block off their calendars, maybe even consider having days where there is no meetings. Like as a company or as a team, hey, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays or just Tuesdays, we don't do meetings. It's a focus day. Other ideas is around team building exercises. So most team building exercises are really geared towards extroverts. So you just might want to revisit those and just make sure that you're designing them in a way that's introvert friendly. So you might want to incorporate a little bit more one-on-one activities or some small group activities. And when it comes to like the icebreaker questions, you can totally use those, but similar to like the meeting agendas or the brainstorming, send the question out ahead of time so your introverts have time to think through their answer. They're not caught off guard. And when they come in, they might be nervous, but at least they know what to expect and everybody can pay attention, which is the whole point of the exercise. So some longer term solutions is, again, education. This is not a one and done deal. This is not something that you can teach once and be done with it. You have to have ongoing conversations so it stays in the conversation. If you have business resource groups, we had this back where I used to work. Those are great. I actually wanted to do one for introversion. I was going to propose one before I left, but that's a great place. And then you've got ongoing conversations about it, ongoing events, education. So you want to keep that going. Office environment. Now, this may be, depending on who you are in your organization, you may have no control over this, but you can facilitate conversations, and not suggesting that you go back to where all the offices has everybody secluded in offices, their individual offices. But if you do have a very open floor plan, how can you potentially change things so that it's more introvert inclusive and friendly? And then finally, the interviewing process. You might want to revisit things with the interviewing process because, again, unconscious bias is going to come in there. So this is where, again, education is important. You want to make sure that you have introverts on the people as interviewers who are interviewing the candidates. Maybe revisit the whole idea of panel interviews because those aren't great for introverts. And novel ideas, maybe provide interviewees with some of the interview questions beforehand so they can prepare. So not saying you have to, but it's a thought. Or maybe just getting rid of the whole rapid fire question thing and just have conversations. Those are great formats for introverts, and you can get a lot of great information that way. So as I was going through some of those, I know that was a little quick and it wasn't a ton of things, but I wanted to get your mind thinking on a few options or a few areas. If you felt some resistance coming up, like, oh, we can't do that, challenge that. Ask yourself why. Is it because, well, we've just always done it this way? And if it, or any variation of that. And if that's the case, then that's what we're talking about here, is challenging what you've always done. Because what if the way you've always done things is not the best way? What if the way you've always done things is limiting those, or is excluding half of your workforce or half of the candidates who are applying and interviewing for your positions? So challenge yourself on any resistance and be open to new ideas. Because the benefits of a more inclusive environment, greater innovation, increased productivity, stronger company loyalty, overall employee well-being. They'll be much happier, less stressed. And while this is not proven, but I got to believe if you've got greater innovation, your employees are more productive, there's more company loyalty and satisfaction, and employees are healthy and happy and really glad to be there, I got to believe it is going to translate to higher profits. So it's time to speak up and share what you know to change the conversation. You get to speak up now because you know there's an issue, whether it's with you or whether it's your team or your organization. So you can encourage people to have these conversations and to start to change things. This is new leadership. This is where we start to embrace everybody who's there. This is going to allow your people to understand themselves better, to connect with themselves better, to feel seen, heard, understood, and it's going to allow them to shine, which is going to allow the organization and the teams to shine. So I know I went through all that quickly, but I wanted to stay on time and leave a few minutes in case there are questions. But if you want to learn more, you can go to my website. I do have articles there. I have a YouTube channel that actually just started a month or two ago that I'm continuing to grow. There are resources there. I have free resources that you can grab if you're an introvert or you want some of your introverted employees to have some resources. If you are an introvert on the call that's listening and you are feeling called to explore, finding your voice, feeling more empowered, finding your strengths, connecting with your introversion, then jump on a call with me. Even if you don't want to work together in this one-on-one call, we're going to explore how this conditioning has impacted you. We are going to talk about what your strengths are, and this is going to allow you to walk away from the call feeling really empowered to start to do things your way. And if you do feel called to work with me, we can definitely explore the options as well. And then finally, if you want to start bringing some of that education piece into your team or your organization, I'm happy to come in and do a talk similar to this. We can put together a workshop where it's a little bit more interactive. So there is a link there where you can go in and just fill out a quick form. We'll hop on a call and we will find out what is best for your organization. And with that, we're going to wrap that up.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That was